Taoiseach, there's no doubt that the budget yesterday announced in this House places a disproportionate burden on older people in our community and in our society and targets them in a savage way. And it seems as if the cuts themselves were designed to target an older person when he or she was most vulnerable, when he or she was sick, bereaved or living alone. And I want to quote, Taoiseach, a statement you made in 2008 in this House in relation to how a government should behave with older people. And I quote, "A government should not use the elderly as a tool or weapon reducing them to economic statistics. Elderly people do not want to be pressurised about means tests and application forms about their property, their savings, what they have in the bank, whether a man from government will call to their home, or if they will lose their right to the medical card. They do not want that. They're anxious about what happens to themselves and their families." And that's a direct quote from what you said, Taoiseach. And yesterday's budget perhaps sums up everything you said the older people didn't want from a government. From the abolition of the telephone allowance, Taoiseach, which is unacceptable in terms of what it will do to older people. The withdrawal, definite withdrawal, of 35,000 medical cards from people over 70. And then that wider witch hunt of another 100,000 cards that will be taken from people. And Taoiseach, it started already. The letters are being issued, so savings can take effect from January. Anyone listening to Joe Duffy Liveline during the week would have had those letters read out that are going out withdrawing cards from people. The fivefold increase in prescription charges over the last 2 years is going to hit older people significantly.
Thank you.
The doubling of property tax will hit older people. The reducing of tax relief on health insurance and the abolition of the bereavement grant, all targeted against older people. You add it all up, Taoiseach, and it represents a very savage attack and targeting of older people in our community. And the question I have for you, Taoiseach, why? Why in this particular budget did you single out older people for particular targeting and discriminatory treatment? What did the older people of Ireland ever do to you to deserve this kind of treatment?
Thank you.
I would ask you, Taoiseach, will you commit to reversing these cuts, particularly the abolition of the telephone allowance and the definite withdrawal of 35,000 medical cards from over 70s?
Taoiseach.
First of all, as I said to Deputy Martin, that the budget for 2014 is the first and critical step, Concola, that will allow this country to get out of the bailout programme into which we were led by Fianna Fáil. And secondly, it's designed to get this country back to work, which is the central mandate given to this government of the Fine Gael party and the Labour Party. And the budget yesterday contains a whole series of measures to deal with that. Now, Deputy Martin mentioned a number of issues here that affect older people. I might say, though, that the Budget 2014 has extended the principle of previous budgets of protecting and supporting the elderly in a great number of ways. For example, Deputy Healy-Rae, the state pension, the carer schemes, the free travel, free television licences have not been touched. And because we recognise that fuel is a big issue for the elderly, the fuel allowance has not been changed. And excise duty on fuel has been left untouched as well. And the tax treatment for the elderly remains unchanged, and there is no change in the net income for pensioners as a result of this budget. Those aged 65 and over will continue to be treated more favourably under the Irish Income Tax Code than all other taxpayers. This favourable treatment of pensioners has been protected by the budget. Now, the question of the bereavement grant was raised. This was dealt with very adequately by the Minister for Social Protection yesterday. The allowances that are there to support our elderly still continue and are untouched, despite the decision in respect of the bereavement grant. I might say that the average cost of a funeral between 3,000 and 5,000 around the country, up to 10,000 in Dublin. In respect of medical cards, the position here, Deputy Martin, which you're well aware of, is that when a card is issued to an applicant, the card is issued for 3 or 4 years and there's an onus and a duty upon the person who receives the card. If there's any change in their circumstances, they are supposed to notify the HSE in this case. It rarely applies. In an analysis of 1.2 million cards last year, I think it was 22 that were returned voluntarily. What I want to say today, Deputy Martin, is that there has been no change in the eligibility criteria for medical cards. So just a second now.
Sorry.
No change in the eligibility criteria.
Deputy would have a chance to respond.
So a pensioner who receives the old age pension, contributory or non-contributory, or has the changed limits here, is fully qualified to a medical card and will get it in accordance with those criteria.
Thank you.
But I think it's important to say this, Deputy Martin, that of the 1.8 million cards that have been issued, more than ever before, the people are paying for these cards. Now, some people have died. Some cards are redundant in the sense that people's incomes have changed and they've moved up. Some were migrant workers and have gone back to their own countries. Others, for one reason or another, are not in the eligibility category. So if people, there's a need here, genuinely, for the HSE to be able to communicate to pensioners, in particular, that when they get a review notice, there's no point in not dealing with it. Because anybody who's under these criteria, of course, they get their medical card. But I think it's important to note that doctors who are in receipt of payment for the GMS medical card lists, in some cases, in significant numbers of these cases, they may not be eligible cards anymore for the reasons that I've mentioned. So I think it's important to check those lists accurately and see how many cards that have been issued are still viable. And as I said, there's been no change in the criteria or the eligibility. So there hasn't.
Thank you.
So everybody who's entitled to a medical card on those criteria gets a medical card. And I don't think that we should be sending out scare messages to pensioners that all these medical cards have been taken away. 1.8 million medical cards issued, and even when the new eligibility limits and the threshold limits for GP cards are issued, 97% of people over 70 years of age will have access either to medical cards or free GP cards.
Thank you. Deputy Mark.
The older people who might be watching this morning will find your response incredible, because you've managed to achieve basically saying that black is white. I mean, you just said, Taoiseach, that there was no change in the eligibility threshold. That's what you said. I just want to quote back what's in, just for the record, in relation to Minister Burton's social welfare announcements. Reduce income thresholds for the over 70 medical cards, €900 couple and €500 single. That is a reduction in eligibility, which will take 35,000, which will withdraw medical cards from 35,000 older people. So don't please come in and say, will you accept it? You didn't say that. You said the opposite to that a moment ago. And that's why older people watching here are saying, what's going on in this place? Someone can actually stand up and say, no, don't bother with the fine print of the budget. What that says isn't really happening at all. That's the hallmark of yesterday's presentation. And Taoiseach, thanks be to God you didn't touch the free fuel, because you did it last year. You reduced it from 32 weeks to 26 weeks. So you already cut that last year. And again, when you said earlier that the income of older people will not be hit. That's denying reality, Taoiseach. The property tax will be doubled. That's going to hit people's income. They're going to have to pay for it. The medical cards will hit people's income. The prescription charge, Taoiseach, it's gone from 50 cents to 2.50. People are going to have to pay for that, Taoiseach. That reduces their income. You see, you have this broad kind of, the big lie, there's no cuts in the headline rates. But if you add everything else up, there's a significant reduction in the take-home income of older people. You're taking money from older people via the back door, Taoiseach. And I think you should acknowledge that. Because when people watch in and have the kind of denials of reality articulated on an ongoing basis, they lose all faith in this House.
Thank you, Deputy.
In terms of any credibility emanating from it, Taoiseach. And the same happened last week, Taoiseach, in terms of discretionary medical cards. I mean, you denied the reality last week that discretionary medical cards would be taken from people.
We're over time.
And it took a whole host of letters from deputies, and then your own people at the weekend said, by the way, Taoiseach, there is a problem with the discretionary medical cards. Despite you denying that reality here last week.
Thank you.
So people had been hit, Taoiseach. And what I ask you, Taoiseach, are you considered will you consider reversing the abolition of the household benefits, which is again a direct take from the income of older people, and will you reverse the decision to lower the thresholds in relation to the over 70?
Of course, Deputy Martin, I acknowledge the fact that the budgetary resolutions went through yesterday and the changes that are here at the very highest level will apply, of course. But let me repeat again for you that the state pension, the carer schemes, the free travel, the free TV licence have not been touched, the fuel allowance has not been changed. There's no change in the net income for pensioners as a result of this budget. Unlike what you did yourself, when you cut the widow's pension, the blind pension, the invalidity pension by over €8 per week in budget 2010 for under 65s, Deputy Martin. You also cut the disability allowance across the board by €8 per week without regard to means testing. You also cut the core social welfare rates by €16 a week, or 8% in budgets 2010 and 2011, without any discussion with them. And Fine Gael and Labour, at least its government, has maintained core social welfare rates since. And I might point out to you that in your own 4-year plan, which you won't listen to now, you intended to cut €1.5 billion from social welfare services. So don't come in here the morning after the budget with your opportunistic blather that you go on with all the time. The situation here that in respect of the medical card list, it's very important that we find out the true situation here. How many cards are redundant? How many migrant workers have gone away? How many people have died in respect of medical cards?
Sorry, you
never listen, do you? The point is the taxpayer are paying doctors for medical cards in respect of the GMS list. That's quite normal and that's the way it should be. But those lists should be accurate. And the reason for carrying out an analysis of this is to find out what is the truth.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
How many have died whose cards are still on the list? How many migrant workers have gone away? How many are redundant? How many have changed and whether circumstances have increased? So the message here, Deputy Martin, is that for medical card applicants, the vast majority of these who, in the ordinary way, the eligibility limits apply and they qualify for their full medical cards. And those who lose them at the top end qualify for GP cards.